First thing first, parenting with individuation in mind needs to be a thing, aka raising a child who doesn't owe you. Too many parents rely on control to raise their children, or on fear, or in too much discipline, or even in being their friend. But it seems that the parent always has a goal in mind for their relationship with the kid. It's almost like an agenda that they have for them. Some parents want a genius, so they hyper-focus on academics. Others want an athlete, so they overschedule sports until their kids' knees give out. Some want legacy, so they shove them into the family business whether the kid likes it or not. And let's not forget the parents who just want a respectful child, which is often code for someone who never questions me. All of that is bullshit simply because all of this is control disguised as love. In psychology, individuation is the process of becoming one's own person, separate from parental expectations, societal conditioning, and inherited narratives. It's that moment when a child realizes, oh wait, I don't actually like soccer. Dad, you like it. And this is where most parents struggle too, because individuation feels like rejection to a parent who confuses control with love. A child asserting who they are feels like a betrayal when a parent believes their role is to dictate who that child should be, and that they as a parent are absolutely right. But here's the thing, you can't claim to want a strong, independent child while punishing them for having their own mind. That's not parenting, that's ego maintenance. A parent's job is not to push a child toward a specific life path, is to teach them the skills to navigate whatever path they choose. That means, as an example, teach them boundary setting, but don't be shocked when they set boundaries with you as a parent, eh? They're supposed to do that. A child who learns to say no at school or work will also learn to say no to a parent who oversteps. That's not disrespect, that's emotional intelligence in action, okay? Or teach them critical thinking, but don't ever say because I said so then. Nothing kills independent thought faster than blind obedience. If you want a child who thinks for themselves, be prepared for them to think differently than you, for them to challenge you, for them to debate you, and expect for you to get humbled at some point because you want them to get smarter than you. Teach them accountability, but be willing to take accountability yourself. If your adult child critiques how they were raised, that's not ingratitude, it's growth. And if you did a good job, they'll have feedback. That's the truth. If you didn't, they'll have nothing to say because they will have left. In the last years, we have seen such a surge of people cutting off contact with their families, and here's a brutal truth. Children don't go no contact over small disagreements. They don't distance themselves because of one bad fight or a few questionable parenting choices. The adult children who cut off their parents are the ones that have been trying for years to explain, to repair, to set boundaries. And those boundaries were ignored, mocked, or punished even. A child who was never allowed to say, hey, this hurt me in childhood will eventually stop saying it altogether. And when they reach that point, they don't fight, they leave, like Vitani did. The healthiest parent-child relationships are the ones where criticism is safe, where the child can say, I didn't like how you handled this growing up, and the parent says, I hear you, let's talk about it. That's what Simba is able to accomplish at the end of the movie, and that need to be a lesson for us all, because if all parents would raise their children to be whole, then the community becomes more and more whole, more and more diverse. When we raise children out of fear, we raise them incomplete. Fear-based parenting produces fear-based adults, people who are constantly seeking validation, who don't trust themselves, who either submit too easily or rebel without direction. Those are the people that are going to create the community. How can we expect the community to be stable when us as individuals are not? We end up not being whole. We end up being fragments of who we were meant to be, shaped by survival rather than self-discovery. And instead of focusing as adults on development as adults, we have to now focus on our own healing. And this isn't just a personal issue at the end of the day, it's a community-wide disease. Because think about it, a community of people who were taught that their worth is in pleasing others will struggle to challenge harmful traditions because they were never taught how to question authority. That's bad for the community. A community of people who are shamed for making mistakes will avoid risk and innovation because failure was punished, not seen as part of learning. That is bad for the community. A community of people who are controlled rather than guided will either crave power over others or accept being controlled because they never learned autonomy, and that's bad for the community. So you see, this is why communities decay, or at least part of why they do. Not because people grow apart, but because they were never taught how to evolve together. But there's another aspect that is deeply problematic to the way we understand community nowadays, and that's all about leadership. ironically is very much connected to parenting. Let's connect the dots. We've spent generations raising fear-based adults who are taught to please, obey, and conform rather than ask questions, take risks, or trust their own instincts. So naturally, when these adults look for leadership, they don't actually look for wisdom, emotional intelligence, or strategic thinking. They couldn't recognize these skills anyway, because those weren't the qualities they were raised to value or to protect. Society often mistakes stubbornness for assertiveness, like a person who refuses to listen, compromise, or adjust. Their perspective isn't assertive, they're rigid. But because many people were raised in environments where authority was absolute, they associate leadership with never backing down rather than knowing when to adapt. True leaders don't just hold their ground, they know when to pivot.
I can pivot, bro.
Heard that, Donald Trump? Jesus. Then we have the problem that we don't see a difference between impulsivity and actual bravery. We glorify reckless decisions as if taking action without thinking is a sign of bravery, of courage. Bravery isn't about doing whatever you want despite the consequences. It's about facing hard truths, making difficult choices, and standing firm even when it's uncomfortable. Being brave means often being the only one standing against something. It means having a moral compass guiding one's courage. Jake Paul is a good example of impulsivity disguised as courage, and Brendan Fraser is an example of bravery. I mean, this man was blacklisted from Hollywood after reporting sexual assault. Like, if this doesn't tell you how we treat real brave people as a society, I don't know what can. Which actually brings me to my third point. We're so used to authority figures acting like they know everything that when we see someone thinking critically, questioning themselves, or speaking with nuance, we mistake it for weakness. Truth is, everything has nuance. We're supposed to find the balance in everything. That's what a leader is supposed to do, facilitate finding that balance. You know what part of us doesn't want to find a balance though? Ego. And we mistake it very often for wisdom, unfortunately. However, real wisdom requires humility and self-awareness and the ability to say, I don't know. Traits that fear-based adults often struggle with because admitting uncertainty was punished in childhood. Do you think it's a coincidence that we don't have a center party? Instead, we have this binary system where two parts equally toxic fight to humiliate the other. I'm not quite sure if everyone understands this, even though a wise person will understand. We're not supposed to fight to establish who's right and who's wrong. That's a battle of the ego. Wisdom doesn't engage in battles. But we love battles so much that we seem to never mature beyond the war mentality. So another factor is being introduced in the downfall of community, thinking that being loud automatically means being strong. Confidence isn't about volume. I hope we can all agree to that. It's about presence. It's about composure. But because we equate leadership with dominance, we assume the loudest person in the room is the most capable, when in reality, true leadership is about making space for others, not just taking up space. I mean, that's why bullies thrive, because they're loud and everyone thinks that they're strong because of that. In reality, they might be the most insecure among all y'all. But ultimately, we come to the biggest problem, which is that at some point, the line between selfishness and motivation becomes extremely blurred in a leader. Hustle culture has convinced us that stepping on others is just ambition in action. But real motivation isn't about being self-serving. It's about having a vision that extends beyond yourself. True leaders uplift those around them, whereas insecure leaders compete with their own team. And after all, that's the world we currently live in, isn't it? Power-hungry individuals promoted because they look confident, ending up filling positions that they are absolutely unqualified for. Reckless decision makers praised for taking bold action even when it's disastrous, because it's much more important to have a viral TikTok where you do something reckless and have everyone call you an icon, even if ironically, and even if you're behaving absolutely idiotic. And the tragedy of it all is that at the end of the day, thoughtful, emotionally intelligent people are dismissed as too soft or indecisive or too in the middle, when in reality they're simply calm and able to process nuance, which requires much more thought when solving problems. And that's why even if we try to build some community today, it eventually falls apart. Friendships you thought were forever ended. Communities you were once so excited to be a part of turned out to be incompatible. Political parties you believed in end up disappointing you because we don't know how to do community right yet. So we find ourselves as a society in an interesting limbo, which is the dark side of the community. On one side, people who are raised in communities, maybe, religion, certain culture, political views, etc., can't wait to get away from the small community for a couple of reasons. And that's when we see the dark side of the community. They are tired of everyone knowing their business and can't wait to experience freedom to make their own mistakes and experiences away from the judging eyes. In fact, in many communities, even families, like when your parents don't close your door, privacy is non-existent. Every decision, mistake, or deviation from the norm is noticed, commented on, and sometimes even punished. And this creates a constant fear of judgment, where people learn to perform rather than live authentically, therefore develop this craving for freedom. A good example of that is Ariel. She's constantly watched, told what's acceptable, and reprimanded for questioning things. Her desire to explore the human world isn't just about curiosity, it's about escaping the suffocation of her father's authority. But because she was never taught how to navigate autonomy, her rebellion is impulsive and risky, leading her to make a deal with Ursula without thinking through the consequences. These people are often being assigned a role that they don't want and becomes more and more restrictive as they grow up. Communities thrive on predictability and stability, which means members are often assigned rigid roles based on gender, birth, order, abilities. If you were the responsible one, the caretaker, the golden child, whatever, good luck trying to redefine yourself, okay? The community has already decided who you are. People lose the ability to see themselves as anything beyond their assigned role, and this is why eldest daughters struggle with being selfish, why gifted kids feel like failures the moment they stop excelling, and why many people feel trapped in jobs, relationships, or lifestyles they never actually chose. Mirabel from Encanto is a wonderful example of that. This type of people usually struggle a lot with finding motivation to do things for themselves if there are no people around to do them for. In tight-knit communities, self-worth is tied to serving others, whether it's family, the church, or the collective. Doing things for oneself is seen as selfish, and as a result, people grow up externally motivated, only working hard because they're being watched or expected to serve a purpose. Like Woody, his entire identity is based on being Andy's favorite toy. When faced with the idea of Andy growing up, he has no sense of purpose beyond serving someone else. It's only when he realizes his value isn't dependent on being chosen that he begins to see himself differently, you see. Also, they usually don't know how to handle boredom. In communities where everything is structured, free time is often seen as wasteful. If you weren't working, studying, or serving the group, you were doing something wrong, and because they never had to sit with boredom, they often overschedule themselves, develop unhealthy coping mechanisms, or feel guilty when they're not productive. Like our boy, Lightning McQueen, who is so obsessed with winning and productivity, so when he's forced to slow down and radiator springs, he panics because he's never learned how to just be. These type of people also struggle with asserting boundaries because they're seen as betrayal. Saying no to helping family, following traditions, or agreeing with the group is met with guilt-tripping, shaming, or even punishment. Like Mother Gothel, she manipulates Rapunzel into believing that setting boundaries is wrong. Every time Rapunzel tries to express autonomy, Gothel gaslights her into doubting herself, making it nearly impossible for her to stand her ground. These people also usually avoid conflict and are people pleasers because harmony is prioritized over authenticity. Questioning elders, leaders, or traditions is seen as disrespect, so children learn to stay quiet, agree, and suppress their real thoughts. An example is Elsa, of course, who was raised to hide who she is to maintain peace. She internalized the message that authenticity equals conflict, which is why she isolates herself instead of expressing her needs. They have real struggles with individual responsibility as they often revert to the collective, and that happens often because decisions are made as a group. Individual responsibility is secondary to collective well-being, meaning people rarely have to think for themselves alone. They might constantly seek validation, feel lost without a group, and even have difficulties with making big life choices. On the other hand, there is of course a good side to the community, a side where we find support and shelter, where we can share values, but unfortunately, we often romanticize it and end up thinking about a community that actually doesn't really exist. Here's why. Yes, communities can absolutely offer help, but what might not be very well known is that that help is often conditional. In communities, help isn't always about kindness. Just think about your last group project, which ironically is one of the most hated exercises by students, by the way.
Justifiably so.
That help is often about obligation, control, and expectations, because if you accept help, you might owe favors indefinitely. If you help less than expected, expected, you're seen as selfish, even if you have good reasons like health or burnout. I was personally raised in a very connected community for a long part of my life, and I have a story close to my heart about that. So I live in Romania, and my mother is of course Romanian, and when someone dies here, we have a bit of a tradition. We call everyone after the funeral and offer them food to honor the person's memory, right? Now, traditionally speaking, that food is prepared by the whole community, family, non-family, everyone is involved. And they often gather around, and for like 3 days straight or something like that, they cook continuously, even during the night, because, you know, there's a lot of things to be done. Now, some years ago, my grandfather, my mom's dad, died. So together with the family, they started to organize the funeral. And as I said, traditionally speaking, the community prepares the food. But since times have changed, there are some who prefer to hire a catering firm rather than spend 3 full days cooking, which is what my mother suggested. You know, she's a little bit more modern like that. Now, tell me why that has caused the biggest fight between her and her sister, to the point that they didn't even recover today. Because her sister sees that as disrespectful, so she expects my mom to help. So whatever, my mom decided to let it go and help with the food, but she has some terrible health issues that causes her to be in a lot of pain on a daily basis. Therefore, staying overnight to cook without resting isn't something she can accomplish without severe consequences. But when she left for the day, her sister berated her because she should help. No matter how she feels, no matter what are her issues, and it's not like my mom was needed, there were plenty of other people around, but I'm sharing this story just to give a real life example of something that can be seen as helpful, but it ultimately doesn't feel like it. If you have such experiences, I would love to hear about them in the comments, by the way. Now, communities can definitely help in feeling less alone, but we often forget that being part of a community doesn't guarantee connection. You can be surrounded by people and still feel deeply alone because maybe there's nobody that shares your interests, values, or depth. Maybe the conversations remain surface level or judgmental, and oftentimes you can feel like an outsider in your own home. Like my mom in the example before, or like Belle, who isn't physically alone, but she is intellectually isolated in her little village. Her town is tight-knit, yet no one understands her. She craves deeper conversations, curiosity, and adventure, but instead, she's met with mockery and gossip. People assume that community space equals belonging, but that's only true if you're accepted by the community. If you're too different, you become an outsider. If you challenge the status quo, you get excluded, and if you don't meet certain standards, you're shunned. Like Quasimodo, he longs to be part of the world outside, yet when he tries, he's ridiculed, abused, and cast out. The same community he admires refuses to see him as one of their own just because he looks different. Community teaches you values, sure, but those values can be limiting. Moana's island, for instance, has strict expectations: stay, lead, follow tradition. When Moana challenges the rules, she is seen as rebellious rather than curious, you see. The community's values aren't inherently bad, but they limit her ability to grow. So, here's where this movie comes in handy, I mean The Lion King too, to explain how to build the perfect community, because